Jesus said in Matthew 5:19, "Do and teach God's law." This is God's law number 51, justice about victims, business, and animals. Here's God's law 51 from God's law book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, 1 through 16. Here's verse 1 through 3, civil justice. Quote, "When people have a dispute, they are to take it to the court, and the judges will decide the case, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty. If the guilty person deserves to be beaten, the judge shall make them lie down and have them flogged in his presence with the number of lashes the crime deserves. But the judge must not impose more than 40 lashes. If the guilty party is flogged more than that, your fellow Israelite will be degraded in your eyes." End quote. There were only three categories of punishment in God's law: capital punishment, restitution, or flogging, depending on the offense. All trials and punishments were open to the public. In capital offenses, local citizens affirm the verdict and help carry out the punishment. In other cases where the judges try the case, they are to be present if a punishment is to be carried out. With God's law, there is no provision or need for prisons. God's law is always fair and just, and the judgments are to be carried out right then expeditiously. Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, quote, "When a crime is not punished quickly, people feel it is safe to do wrong." End quote. Godly judges will always acquit the innocent and always condemn the guilty. Proverbs 24:23 through 25 reads, "It is wrong to show favoritism when passing judgment. A judge who says to the wicked, 'You're innocent,' will be cursed by many people and denounced by the nations. But it will go well for those who convict the guilty. Rich blessings will be showered on them." End quote. Meditate on what God says here in Proverbs 21:15, quote, "Justice is a joy to the godly, but it terrifies evildoers." End quote. In fact, no Christian loves God more than they who love justice and equally hate evil. A Christian doesn't love one any more than they hate the other. How do I know that? And how do I know that a person who loves justice and equally hates evil will be full of joy? Because God will fill them with joy, as he did Jesus. Hebrews 1:9 says, quote, "You love justice and hate evil. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you, pouring out the oil of joy on you more than on anyone else." End quote. Never forget Psalms 11:7 and Proverbs 8:13, quote, "The righteous Lord loves justice, and to fear the Lord is to hate evil." End quote. Deuteronomy 25:4, animal care, quote, "Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain." End quote. There are some people today that put animals above people. This is an affront to the Lord God, who, quote, "made people in his own image." End quote. But on the other hand, there are some people who do not care for their animals, and this is the reflection of an unrighteous person. Proverbs 12:10, quote, "The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel." End quote. Deuteronomy 25:11 and 12 is about victims' justice. Quote, "If two men are fighting, and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts, you shall cut off her hand, show her no pity." End quote. This verse does not condemn a wife trying to physically help her husband in a fight, but it may not be too smart to interfere with two men fighting. Proverbs 26:17 says, quote, "Interfering in someone else's argument is as foolish as yanking a dog's ears." End quote. But the key in understanding this verse is understanding the word seizes. In Hebrew, the word seize is hazark. This word means to be strong, to prevail, to be severe and grievous. End quote. The implication of this word was to damage and impair a man from having future children. In effect, this was preemptive murder of a man's future children. The damage to the man was permanent, physical, and life-changing. God's appropriate equal punishment for the woman was permanent, physical, and life-changing. Though most men would rather have one hand cut off than his genitals impaired, affecting his future physical relationship with his wife and his ability to have children. Thus God said, "Show her no pity." End quote. With our fallen nature and the influence of the animal culture, the immoral culture of the left, most would feel pity for the perpetrator, especially a female perpetrator. But the immoral leftists are especially good at promoting pity, especially when it's for the wrong people, such as the criminals. But pity injustice is evil because it is unjust. Proverbs 28:5 says, quote, "Evil people don't understand justice, but those who follow the Lord understand completely," end quote. Of all people, Christians should never question God's moral and perfect justice, or think their finite wisdom is wiser than God's infinite wisdom. As Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 1:25, quote, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom," end quote. If people know God's civil law punishment will be swiftly and faithfully carried out, it would so deter wrongdoing that punishment would seldom need to be carried out. The godless left always focuses on the punishment of the criminal and seldom considers the victim. They are empathetic toward the criminal because they are criminal in rebelling against God and His Word. But this is what God says. Proverbs 17:15. He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord. Proverbs 18:5 says, "It is not good to be partial to the wicked and so deprive the innocent of justice." Proverbs 21:15 says, "When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers." Business integrity. Deuteronomy 25:13 through 16. Quote, "Do not have two differing weights in your bag, one heavy, one light. Do not have two differing measures in your house, one large, one small. You must have accurate and honest weights and measures so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. For the Lord your God detests anyone who does these things, anyone who deals dishonestly." End quote. One main reason America has been so financially successful above all other nations in the world is because it was more influenced by God's moral law in business, honesty in capitalism, just weights and measurements. However, the Democrat Woodrow Wilson started the unjust, quote, progressive, quote, tax code, ratified into the 16th Amendment of the Constitution in 1913. A progressive tax code is in direct violation to God's law having differing weights. Differing tax percentages are unjustly more harsh on those who do better. The 1913 Revenue Act established a permanent progressive income tax starting at a rate of 1% on net personal incomes above $3,000, with a surtax of 6% on incomes over $500,000. This is sin, and all unrepented sin always leads to worse sin. Roosevelt, in his New Deal, expanded this sin with the Revenue Act of 1935, the wealth tax, when the top marginal rates reached over 90%. Some Republican presidents have worked to bring taxes and unjust marginal rates down ever since. But any progressive tax is always sin and unjust. It's promoted by the left as having pity on those who don't do better, thus undermining godly incentive to do better. And said above, pity in law is always unjust and thereby always counterproductive.